Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the It Depends podcast. I am your host, Kevin Goldsmith. I am a CTO, a tech executive. I've been working in software in the technology industry for over 30 years. And earlier this year, 2024, I released a book called It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership, 2012 to 2022. And in this podcast, we serialize that book chapter by chapter every other week. For those of you that have been listening to podcasts, welcome back. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. For those of you who are new, I'll tell you there's also a newsletter. That newsletter publishes on the weeks that the podcast doesn't publish. And that newsletter is serializing the book out of order because each of the chapters is an article I wrote. So they're all independent and can be read mostly. Some of them are series, but can mostly be read independent of each other. And this podcast, we serialize the audiobook in order. If you're interested, if you find this podcast valuable, find the newsletter valuable, I would so appreciate it if you would consider buying the book. Obviously, I'm giving you the book for free here. You can also find the original articles that I wrote and read it that way. I will say that when I collected them into the book, I did a lot of editing and cleaning up and fixing grammar, to try and add some value into the collection besides just putting them all in one place. But if you find this valuable, if you find what I'm saying helpful to you in your career, please consider buying the book. You can find links to all the different stores at itdependsbook.net. Itdependsbook, all one word, .net. And that's also got the links to this podcast. It's got the links to the newsletter as well. This week, we are hearing Chapter 16, A Resignation Can Be an Opportunity. So almost halfway through the book at this point. I wrote this article in 2020, and it really, almost any one of my articles will have been in response to something that was kind of going on. But this is something I've, as a leader and as a manager of managers, this is something I've had to deal with in lots of different contexts and lots of different companies. The idea that when you lose someone, and certainly when I was first a people manager and I had my first person resign, that was like a big deal. And it felt personal. It felt like they were leaving me. And people say, the very common phrase, people don't leave jobs, people leave managers. Absolutely true. And so when it first happened to me, or the first few times, somebody left, I took it really personally. And I really felt like, what did I do wrong? And is there a way I can convince them to stay? I spent a lot of time thinking about it and over analyzing it. And also I did a lot of work trying to avoid it. If I started to feel like somebody might be considering it, I kind of over index on things I thought might keep them. I've also worked for companies, especially startups with first-time founders, where they are overly concerned. I say this, overly concerned about people leaving. Like they don't want anyone to leave. And they would do what I consider kind of ridiculous things to have essentially 100% retention, including, somebody's thinking about leaving. Oh, why are you leaving? Well, I'm a manager. They're going to make me a director. Okay, we'll make you a director, right? And what that started to teach everyone at the company is, if you want a raise, just tell somebody you've got another job and they'll give you for more money and they'll give you a raise. To the point where I actually had someone in my organization try to do that. I joined as CTO of this company, and not long after that, somebody in the organization, because they were just kind of used to this, you want a raise, just tell them you have a job offer for more money and they'll give you more money. So somebody in my organization tried to do that. Hey, I have a job offer for more money. And this person, we weren't so overwhelmed with the quality of their work just to start with. But even if we were, a manager came to me, was really upset and was asking, can I give them a raise to keep them? I said, get a copy of the offer letter. if they're leaving the company just for the raise, find out how much they're getting paid. I don't think we're going to give them the raise, but I'd like to know. And I'd like to make sure they actually have that offer. And the candidate didn't have the offer. They resigned, said they had an offer for more money. They didn't actually have an offer in hand. They just expect us to match the offer that they'd made up. And we said, hey, sorry, we're not going to match the offer. Thanks anyway. And they were surprised. They were upset that they blamed us, that they just resigned expecting to get more money and we didn't give it to them. And there's so many ways that's wrong, but that's what the founders had taught the organization. Anytime you want anything, just threaten to leave and you'll get it. That was a kind of sort of the worst case scenario of what I talk about in this chapter. But I have seen that a lot. And I've seen, managers trying hard to keep employees that weren't performing well. They just didn't want to lose anybody because, again, it felt personal or it felt like they'd done something wrong. Something I learned when I worked for Adobe. Adobe was an interesting company. And by the way, I loved working at Adobe. It was a great company to work for. And one of the things that one of the HR people talked to me about at one point, not just in a conversation, I was remarking on the fact that so many people I was working with there had been in the same jobs for years. I haven't worked for Adobe today for 11 years. Almost all the people I worked with there are still there in the same jobs. And a lot of the people that aren't there anymore aren't there because they retired. So Adobe is a company, I believe still, well, certainly I have a pretty large sample set. Adobe's a company people go to. They like working for the company. Like I said, it's a good place to work for. No ding on Adobe here. But they worked there for many, many years, maybe the rest of their career. And that's a good thing, right? Adobe's a great employer. Like, that's a great thing. It's not a great thing for Adobe. And that's what the HR person was talking to me about, was that we had unhealthy retention in that because people weren't leaving. And certainly this is one of the reasons why I left Adobe, is I kind of topped out. I became a director. I was doing great. I had no path to VP because the company, it's an established company. The VPs above me, one of them just left, right? That's 11 years later. I would have been stuck at that director level for 11 years because the company wasn't growing. So it wasn't like new divisions were going to be created where I could become a VP. I would just sit at that role until something opened up, and then I'd be competing with everybody else at my level, potentially to get that role, assuming they didn't hire it in or buy another company where that person, the CEO or whatever took that role. So because of that, there was nowhere for me to go. And this is one of the things the HR person was saying to me, is our retention was unhealthy because we weren't getting infusion of new blood, of new thinking, of new people. The next generation of leaders at the company, we weren't developing them because the prior there was nowhere for them to go. So if you're entrepreneurial or you're ambitious at a company like that has like incredible retention, if you want to grow, if you want to move up, there's no point to staying there. If you want to do that, you need to go somewhere else. And that is one of the major reasons why I left Adobe, is because I didn't really see a path to continue to move up in the organization. I would have eventually done it. It was going to take me a long time. And I certainly probably could have stayed there. I could still be there and probably certainly wouldn't have been the CTO, almost certainly. Maybe, but was it worth it waiting around a dozen years just in case? And so that is kind of the problem with unhealthy retention. Retention can be too low, which means like your company's churning people out. When the classic example of this, certainly because I'm a Northwest-based person, it would be Amazon. Amazon's famous for having really high churn of employees. They're very specific around what they expect. They have very high expectations of people. They have very low support for if you're not meeting those expectations. So people churn there. I have so many friends that have made it a year or less. And of course, I have friends who've been there 15, 17, 20 years as well. But that's what you think of when you think of kind of low retention employees. And then you have very high retention employers like Adobe. I would say I left Microsoft 20 years ago. Plenty of people I worked with, hired, or, were peers of mine are all still there as well. So, you have that as well. It's Microsoft's maybe another high retaining employer for good or ill. In any case, for you as a manager, when somebody leaves, again, this article, this chapter is all about how you learn from it, how you take that data and use it to become a better manager, but also use it to improve your team. While it is really tempting, because when you lose a person, you lose not only their skill set, but of course, all the knowledge that they built working in the team, especially if it's somebody that's been around for a while. And it's very scary to lose that, because now you're going to have to hire somebody else and build all that up again from scratch. And, it's going to slow the team down or whatever. But so if you think about it in terms of what you've lost, you're going to work maybe too hard to retain that employee. And sometimes they're leaving not because you're a bad manager. Sometimes they're leaving because there isn't, like I left. I liked my boss a lot at Adobe. I just didn't have a path. And that's one of the things I told him. When I left, I left Adobe to go to Spotify. When I left Spotify, one of the reasons I left Spotify was I was a VP. My boss was an amazing boss. He's a great CTO. He was younger than me. He's not going anywhere. It's the best job in Sweden. Like, where's he going? Still there. So, there was no, if I was trying to become a CTO, which I was, then there was no point in me staying at Spotify forever, because I loved working at Spotify. I loved working for Adobe. But for my own career ambitions, I didn't have a path at either of those companies that I thought was reasonable. And it was no ding on my boss. I thought both my bosses were awesome. And sometimes that is the reason why somebody leaves. They want to make a career change. There's no path for them at your company, or they don't perceive a path at your company. We can talk about that separately. It's different if you're a manager versus an individual contributor. And I do talk about that in the chapter. Is maybe they're leaving because they're looking for an opportunity you just can't give them in your team, but maybe you could have found them another role within the company, so the company wouldn't have lost the person. And that would actually be a kudos to you as a manager. How you handle this situation of somebody leaving. And I don't talk about it in the chapter, but I have done that. I can sense that somebody's thinking about leaving, they're unhappy, and I'm doing everything I can to try and address what I perceive or what they're telling me as their concerns. And I work so hard to keep them, and they're still going to go, because I also fully believe that once a decision's made to leave a company, you're probably going to leave the company or the team, but usually the company. If you're a good manager, usually they're leaving the company as opposed to leaving your team to go do the same job in a different team. And once you've made that decision, one of the reasons why I didn't want to just match a raise for somebody who's got a job offer from another company is that I knew if you've done the work to go, apply, go through screens, do a few hours of interviews, probably at multiple companies, you've done the work to go find another job, you're probably not going to stay. And I can give you a raise or match your title. And I think that's a horrible thing. Don't ever do that. Like, oh, I want to be a senior engineer. Okay, we'll make you a senior engineer because you have a job offer as a senior engineer. That's a horrible idea. But people do it. But once I've decided and done the legwork to actually go find other companies, I've pretty much, not exclusively, it depends, decided to leave the company, and I can take the raise you gave me and I might stick around another year, maybe even 2 years. But in my head, I've already moved on. And now I'm moving on with the new salary, and I can probably get somebody to give me more money based on this as my base salary. And by the way, one of the things I do say, if you've ever worked for me and you're a manager and you're losing a person, one of the things I always say is like, you can always make more money somewhere else. Especially when we're in a job seekers market and people are hiring. That's not right now in the world, but because our industry is so cyclic, as I've said in prior episodes, I do expect that to happen again. I do expect us to get back to that point at some point. Because in a job seekers market, certainly you can always find somebody to give you more money. If that's the only thing you care about, you can always do that. So if somebody's only reason for leaving your company is they want more money, you can give them more money and get them to stick around for a little while, but they're gonna then want even more money. And it's way easier to get a big raise by switching companies than it is to stay in the same company. Because in the same company, you're limited by raise budget. When you switch companies, that usually that isn't as much of a constraint. And you see people do that. People who are 100% driven by money, you see them job hopping because each new company gives them the chance to get a 10% raise or a 15% raise or even a 20% raise. And so they hop and hop and hop until eventually people go, like, we're not going to hire you because you just change jobs every year. Coming back. So this chapter talks about how to handle that situation when somebody is resigning, and to bring it back to a little bit more logic and take it a little bit out of the emotion and use it to learn, use it to improve, use it to help improve the company, and use it to improve yourself as a manager. What are the lessons you're going to learn? Another part of this chapter, which I also feel very strongly about, because like I said, when you're feeling like, when you're thinking about losing someone, you're thinking about all the expertise, all the knowledge of your team, of your code that this person has, and you're thinking about this opportunity cost of having to train someone else up and have them learn the code base and have them become contributors, and there's a time that takes, and now you're going to have to spend that time. That's what you start thinking about. That's exactly the wrong way to think about it. Instead, what you need to be thinking about, and that's why it's called a resignation can be an opportunity, is that you're used to the team you have. What are the things that would make your team better that you now have the opportunity to go see, to go find? Who could you add to your team that would improve your team? Could you find someone even better than the person you're losing? And right now, it may seem like there's no way we can get somebody as good as we've had. And that's understandable. That's an understandable feeling because you know that person. You've maybe worked with that person for a long time. But realistically, no, you absolutely can. You could totally find somebody that would be more skilled, more knowledge in the kinds of things you want to do as a team, but didn't have the knowledge about, didn't have the skill set. What skills can you add to the team? Is there a personality thing where you can add somebody that could just change up the team dynamic? Where you get comfortable as a team? And again, like this idea of unhealthy retention, you sometimes get unhealthy as a team. You're just kind of used to doing it the way you're doing it, especially if have had a team that's been together for a while and kind of knows each other and kind of works with each other. You kind of get into your rut where people just do what they do because this is what they do. Having somebody to challenge that, having somebody to come in and go, well, hey, have we thought about it this way? Or at my last company, we did this, or I'm thinking maybe we could do this. That could be magic for your team. That could reinvigorate your team. That could take your team to the next level of performance. And if you start thinking about who can we add to the team to make it better, as opposed to what are we losing, that's a much more healthy way to think about this, to think about it as an opportunity. Don't lose the lessons. You need the lessons. You want to learn from why this person's leaving, and you want to make sure that if there is something you could have done differently, you do it differently the next time. But once you've understood that, now start focusing on what could we add to the team when we backfill this person that's going to make the team more awesome than it was before. And that also helps you become a lot more optimistic about the change. It helps you motivate your team who may be upset that they're losing somebody they worked with that they really like. So keep that in mind and use that. So without further ado, here is chapter 14 of the book, A Resignation Can Be an Opportunity. A Resignation Can Be an Opportunity, originally published on August 27th, 2020. People leave jobs. If you are a manager, people will leave your team, just as someday you will leave your team. When this happens, it is an opportunity, a chance to reevaluate. While you might want to immediately pull out the job description that you used when hiring for the role last time, instead, take some time to think. A chance to learn. When someone tells you that they are resigning, it can feel personal. They don't like working for me. It can hurt. You might immediately look to any reason why it isn't your fault. It is natural to want to move on as quickly as possible. You may even obsess about everything that you could have done differently. Instead, after an employee gives you notice, take a day or two to process and get some distance. Recenter. Then meet with them. Come back to them with an open mind. Do not look to assign blame. Let them know that you are working to improve the team for the people that are still here. Ask what did not work for them and what they will miss, aiming not to assign any extra meaning to what they say. Take notes. Thank them. Take some more time to create mental distance, then come back again and think about the leaver's words. Try to understand from their perspective what they experienced. If they are taking a more senior role elsewhere, was there a similar opportunity in your company that you could have helped them get? If they are joining another company to learn a different technology, was it a technology they could have explored in your organization? Was there another team in your company they could have joined instead? Your goal is to understand their unmet needs. Were there signs that you missed? Were there opportunities in your company or in your team that you could have addressed their needs? Once again, the goal is not to assign blame, and the goal is to not get the employee to change their mind either. The goal is to learn from this experience. So moving forward, how can you approach your role in a better way? Consider this process to be a personal retrospective, and just like in an agile team retrospective, you may want to emerge with a list of things to keep doing, a list of things to start doing, and a list of things to stop doing. A chance to change. As teams evolve, they shift and mature. If the leaver has been in the group for a long time, they may have accumulated an unusual set of responsibilities, and they may have influenced the technical decisions around their strengths. While it may seem like the obvious decision is to look for someone with the same skill set, that is just role inertia. Credit to Amasola Odatunde for introducing that phrase to me. Instead, think of this as an opportunity to reevaluate and make a change without impacting someone. Consider your technical vision for the team and the skill sets of others in the group. Is there something missing that could help you today or in the future? Is this role still needed? Should you repurpose the position into a different one based on the team's long-term needs? It is critical to think about long-term needs and not short-term ones. A mistake managers often make is that they hire someone because of the near-term demand. They assume that there will be a headcount later to cover the long-term need, but too often that headcount doesn't appear and now the team is missing a crucial skill set. Potentially your team is out of balance, where you have too many or too few senior folks. This opportunity means you can now rebalance the levels within your group. Maybe this role is no longer necessary and you can give a headcount to another team that needs it more, or potentially there is someone on the team who is looking for a new challenge and can step into the role. If you are in a position where you manage multiple teams, then this may be an opportunity to reevaluate the team structure, especially if the leaver is a manager. A way to approach this exercise would be to imagine that the person leaving was never on the team. Your manager has given you a brand new headcount and asked you to figure out how you want to use it. Once you have a plan, you can then write the job description and look to fill the role, as you may decide that you need to replace the person with someone who has a similar skill set. If so, you can move forward confidently, knowing that you have thought it through, and if you have also taken the time to learn, you will hopefully retain your new hire for a long time. So if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you'll see why the podcasts are longer and the chapters are shorter. It's because there's a lot more stuff that I could have put into the article, but that would have made it too long to read. Probably no one would have read it. I try and keep the articles relatively short because I'm trying to convey a single opportunity, but there's a ton around each of them that are other things I could have talked about. So hopefully the core ideas came through in that chapter. Hopefully you enjoyed it, got something of value from it. Again, if you like this chapter, if you like the other chapters you've heard, you can get the audiobook on Audible, on Spotify, wherever you get your audiobooks. Only available in English at this point, but maybe that'll change over time. If you would prefer to get the content as text, you can get the ebook or softcover, hardcover. Those are available from basically every online bookstore that you buy your books from, including the ones that are local countries ones. Again, only available in English at this time. I'm still pleased that it is continuing to sell and appreciate everyone that has bought it. If you find value from this podcast, please share it with your friends. Please rate it in your podcast app. Please subscribe to the newsletter. Please share the newsletter. Very much appreciate it. Don't have ads. That is the ad for this podcast. I don't have advertisers. I'm doing this to share knowledge, and I'm also doing it, honestly, to sell books. So sharing it widely just helps me out a lot, and I very much appreciate it. Coming up in September, which is getting close, I'm speaking at the Leading Edge conference in New York City at the beginning of September. You can find more about it at leaddev.com. And if you haven't registered and want to register, you can use an offer code, DistroKid, DISTROKID. That is my offer code. That's the company I work for. That gets you 10% off your entry to your ticket to the Leading Edge conference. I'm giving a talk there on the director to CTO path, how to follow it or how to mentor it. So if you're a CTO and you're trying to mentor your directors, or if you're a director and you want to become a CTO, I hope to see you there. I will have office hours at the conference, so you can talk to me in person, or you can just walk up to me. That's fine too if you recognize me. Happy to do that as well. There's some great others. There's a ton of great speakers at that conference. I so much love White October, the company that puts on the Lead Dev and Leading Edge conferences, because they just do an outstanding job, if I do say so myself as a speaker, picking their speakers. So if you look at the lineup, it's just amazing, and I'm so proud to be part of that group. So I will see you there if you're there. And next week, I will see you in the newsletter. If you would like to subscribe to the newsletter, it is Kevin Goldsmith. That's my name, kevingoldsmith.substack.com. You can also get to it from the itdependsbook.net website. There's a link there. If you have questions, if you have comments, anything, want to say hi, you can email me, contact@itdependsbook.net. And I'm happy to reply to you, to talk to you. Thanks again. I will see you in 2 weeks on the podcast, next week in the newsletter. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.